Buenas tardes and welcome back. Wasn't that a great session with Mirna Soto? Such an inspiring leader. Thank you, Mirna, and thank you, De La Barra, for moderating a great session with Mirna Soto. So now this is our finale session. This is our flagship forum, the CEO Roundtable. SET has been hosting a CEO Roundtable for the last 14 years. We're the first national Hispanic organization to annually host a CEO Roundtable. This one is rather historic. This is the first time that we are hosting an all-women CEO Roundtable. In fact, this is the first time there's been an all-women CEO Roundtable for any U.S. Hispanic audience. So we're really excited about this in this virtual platform. So the way this is going to work is that these are going to be a series of fireside chats between our esteemed moderator, Bertha Coombs, who is a 20-year veteran financial reporter for CNBC. You see her every single day before the millions of audiences, and our three CEOs. And we're so happy to have Janet Foutty, executive chair for Deloitte, as well as Chow, CEO for AT&T Business, and Paula Santilli, the CEO for PepsiCo Latin America. So let's start with a great fireside chat between Bertha Coombs from CNBC and Janet Foutty, executive chair for Deloitte US.
I'd like to welcome now Janet Foutty. She is the executive chair of Deloitte LLC, the whole of Deloitte. She has served as CEO and chair of Deloitte Consulting. But before we start, explain to people what that really means, because when most people hear you've gone from CEO to executive chair, it's like, oh, you're kind of sort of stepping back from the day-to-day and you're kind of getting kicked upstairs. Talk a little bit about the structure of Deloitte and what it means in your career path.
Thank you so much. So first of all, before we jump all the way in, I did want to tell you, Bertha, how grateful I am to be able to have what I now see was going to be a very direct conversation with you today, which I'm delighted about. And a huge thank you to Sid and the HACR team for inviting me to be part of this really important conversation. So just a little bit about Deloitte and how I fit into it to address your question directly. So Deloitte is the largest private partnership in the world. We have 4 business units. I had the privilege of serving as the CEO of one of the business units, Deloitte Consulting, for a number of years. For Deloitte as a whole, however, we have 2 elected leaders elected by our 6,000 equity and non-equity partners. And we have a CEO and an executive chair. So I had the privilege of being asked by our board to stand for being elected by our partners about 2.5 years ago into a 4-year term as our executive chair. So I have sort of the ultimate responsibility for stewardship of the partnership. I work very closely with our CEO on a myriad of business strategy as well as operational issues. And it happens that DEI is a tremendous passion of mine. And so I do spend a lot of my time talking and thinking and helping lead within our organization and in the market in and around DEI, amongst other things that I get to focus on. So that's a little bit about our structure and a little bit how I fit into it.
You know, it makes me think a lot about the thing that we are talking about here in terms of networking and mentorship, when it's not just about a hierarchical corporate relationship, but within this kind of framework, you really have to develop relationships with your peers, both above, below, and at your own level, right?
So I love that you just honed in on that so directly and so clearly. So working and living in a partnership does have many wonderful benefits that I've had the opportunity to do over the course of the years. And it is sort of by its nature less hierarchical than one might think of a traditional corporate structure for an organization that large. And it has provided great opportunities to build very different sets of relationships to exactly your point. But as I spend a lot of time out and about with my clients in corporate America, as well as in government, some of the things I've learned in terms of relationship building within a partnership, I think are very, very, and frankly, equally applicable. One of the things that I have learned along the way, and I do spend a lot of time helping others sort of think through, is how to spend your discretionary relationship time. And the advice that I give is that I've certainly found relevant for my career, but also for others, that if you have 10 extra hours a month to spend on relationship building, or 10 extra hours a year, whatever your construct is, my challenge is that you should spend one of those hours building relationships quote unquote above you in the organization. You should spend 5 hours with your team. I do believe that the relationships you build with the people that work on your teams and with you and for you are, for me personally, is the reason that I have the privilege to be here today. And the rest of the hours, those additional 4 hours, should be spent with your peers. And so are upward relationships important for advice, counseling, help, support? Yes, but I believe the depth of relationships that you build with your teams and your peers are frankly the reason I'm here today, and I do think it applies more broadly than just in a private partnership.
Because you build that sense of trust so that when something comes up, someone knows they can rely on you, or someone knows what your strengths and maybe your weaknesses are.
Yeah, so with your peers, it is, I think, exactly that, is that, I do believe my peers give me the most unfiltered, unbiased, no holds barred feedback with a level of transparency and directness that, frankly, as I started my career, I did not appreciate the value in my relationship with my peers, and the stickiest, messiest things I have to sort through. They are my go-to source of help and challenge and feedback. With my teams, or with one's teams, I think the heart of the matter is actually building trust as well, but a trusting confidence. And the way I like to think about it is that I want my teams to know I would walk absolutely over glass for them. I want them to know how deeply invested I am in their success. Sort of one of my principles I've evolved over time is I do believe the best leader's job is really to make everyone around them wildly successful. And for them to know how much you're invested in them. I figured that out relatively early in my career. What I can tell you is it is so much more valuable now, given the complexity of the market landscape. There is no way that as a leader that I can have the intellect, content, smarts, cleverness to solve the variety of problems and topics coming at me in any given day, week, month. The idea that you're an expert in a domain or a topic and that's what you have to have command of, and you know more than the people that are on your team, has evolved so tremendously. The variety of things that I and we have to deal with as the issues facing us require you to have a team of people who are going to challenge you, complement you, bring very different perspectives to bear. I think having the best people on your team to that end is critical, and that investment in the relationship and the trust that you build, it has this really wonderful sort of both symbiotic but also magnifying effect in my effectiveness. Because we are so deeply committed to each other's success.
I have to think that this year it's been difficult trying to maintain that, although I would imagine with team members and peers that travel a lot, as they do in your industry and in mine, you always have remote relationships anyway. But this year, obviously with the pandemic, that sort of remote touching base is different.
Yeah, it's funny, when I was a young mother and I became a mom. I've got twins who are now 23 years old. I became a mom right before I became a partner in the firm. And so one of the things I learned
because you don't like to take on big challenges all at once.
I have sort of this philosophy that you can only plan your life to such an extent, and I clearly have failed that on many levels in terms of orchestrating all these piece parts. But I did learn the importance of deliberateness in investing in relationships beyond. I mean, I was so focused on my client and my kids, and that was my whole universe. And I did start to pay a lot more attention to the time and energy I spent in maintaining a broad set of relationships. What I would say today is that in some ways, access and logistics are actually much easier. And the ability to reach out and schedule a quick catch-up or conversation with someone is very different, and it is frankly more accessible today through that we're all generally in one place. But what I found is I had to shift the deliberateness. One is to keep making sure you do that and you just don't get consumed by the moment, but also to create the space for connecting more personally, which is not as natural as you would over, if I sat and, you and I sat and we tried to catch up every quarter over a coffee, we would absolutely have professional things we wanted to talk about. But the first 10 minutes of our coffee catch-up would always be around, how's it going? What's new in your life? How can we help each other? And I found in Zoom land, that is definitely more awkward, and you have to be more deliberate about that. So that's something I've been trying to really pay attention to, in creating space, not only in one-on-one conversations, but in small group conversations for that. One of the things I've done with my board, because navigating, and we have a relatively large board, navigating a board over Zoom is very different than a board in person. A board in person, we have, first of all, you can see everyone's body language and you understand the landscape a bit more naturally, but we also have breaks and dinners and time in between to have side conversations, both of a business nature and catch up. And I've actually started something. I was really missing that interaction, not just one-on-one, but with small groups. So we've started waffles and wine with waffles or wine. I shouldn't say waffles and waffles or wine with my board members, which is we do sort of early in the morning or late in the afternoon, time zone dependent, just pure catch up with 3 to 4 board members at a time, with maybe a slight business agenda, but to really check in on each other. And whether that's over, I actually prefer waffles over wine. Whether that's over, your morning muffin or your glass of wine in the evening has created a little more space for that.
And you don't find that it becomes Zoom fatigue? Because I know I have a couple of college friends who keep wanting to do every quarter checkup, and it just gets to the point where I just had so many Zoom meetings. Even though it's social, I just don't have the energy.
Well, this is a little bit of a hybrid, I think, between social and professional, because it is still all part of sort of the day. There are things that I personally have found certainly very challenging in the times that we're living in. But I do feel that those of us that have the privilege to lead right now live in such rarefied air that I've been able to sort of compartmentalize that. And I've certainly challenged my senior team leaders as well to make sure they're creating the space professionally to have that kind of catch up. But I think it's also, when I think about the things that you asked a good question about sort of how do you stay connected? And I think about the things that were in my DNA as a leader pre-pandemic and how those have evolved. So health and well-being is a journey that when I started my career, that was like so low on the totem pole of conversation. It just wasn't discussed at all. It was not in the narrative. And it was all heroics and how long could you go and how little sleep did you have? And obviously the conversation has evolved tremendously around health and well-being. I think this is such an important shining moment for the health and well-being conversation. And really the addition of mental health into that conversation in a much more public and transparent way. So I have really high expectations of my leaders to show up and to make sure that they are there when their teams and their people need them, but to also create the space for their health and well-being as incredibly, incredibly important. So I do think boundaries are even more important in the world that we're living in today than they were.
It's interesting that you mentioned that, because this year, with my news director, we might kibitz a bit, and I always worked remotely. Was only occasionally back at HQ when I would see people, so it felt like I was, I don't know, like the border or something. I somehow came home every now and then. but last June, after the George Floyd and all of the protests, obviously it had been a very stressful transition to working from home and dealing with family and making sure we could all make this transition. And like you, I felt very, very privileged that I could do this and do my job this way. But then I remember I was feeling so stressed watching all of those protests and all of the feelings that it erupted. And at one point, my boss just touched in, and I think he sort of, went and wanted to sort of speak to specifically some of us of color. And it was one of those things where I might have been more diffident years ago and sort of said, "Oh, I'm okay, I'm all right." But I was so touched that he genuinely wanted to know, how are you? And I told him, it's a whole different conversation now. And it has taken on the whole diversity, equity, and inclusion conversation that we've been having for some time in a very different direction. How has it changed for you? And given that this is an area that you've concentrated on, how has it changed for you, and how has it changed as you've approached it in your business? Are the conversations different now?
So thank you for raising the topic so directly and sharing a little of your personal journey. I feel like I would love to turn around and interview and play your role in this topic as well. So the headline is, it has changed dramatically. So if you go back in time, Deloitte has, been really in a leadership spot around, it was diversity and then inclusion, and then diversity and inclusion, and now layering equity into the conversation. We've really been leading in this conversation in the marketplace since the early 90s, back when I started my career. And we felt that we were an organization that really set an important bar and helped lead in the conversation, starting back, somewhat ironically maybe, with a topic that still sits at the epicenter today, which is around transparency and around commitment to change. Our CEO at the time was frustrated with no action, so he went on the morning news circuit, sort of unheard of at the time, and said, we are going to lead the profession in this space and in this conversation around it was around gender diversity at the time. So we've always led, and we thought we stood, and I stood, and we all stood in a very strong place to lead in the conversation. And what I can tell you is the last 9 months have been incredibly humbling. And that humility, and we're not an arrogant organization, and I don't think of myself as a leader, as someone who sort of sits on her laurels by any stretch and tries to keep pushing myself and my organization. But the last 9 months have created a level of humility and accountability, both around equity and around race in particular, in a very, very different manner. And some of that is that we did create the space for listening. I love your example that that your boss called and said, "How are you?" I feel like, as someone who was a consultant for much of my career, a lot of what I do is I listen to what is important to my clients. I listen to my organization. I talked earlier, you're never thinking that I was the smartest or the person with all the answers in the room. Listening is an important skill. But I think our organization realized that we really needed to listen ask questions and listen in a very different way around what it was like to bluntly to be Black in our organization, to be Black in the business community, and that has created an incredible learning and a very different lens on the accountability that I and we carry for leading this conversation, both within our own organizations and in the community broadly, because I do think the business community has an incredibly important role to play. I had the privilege to spend some time with Valerie Jarrett, and she has this one, I'll paraphrase her wonderful line, which is that government sets the floor. It's business that has a responsibility to really rise to its fullest heights in addressing the topics around DEI. And I do feel that I've always felt that responsibility and accountability, but it's through a much broader and much, frankly, better informed lens today. So you asked a simple question and I meandered, so I'd love to take that wherever you'd like to.
It's not a simple question. I mean, I remember when I was on the board of the National Association of Hispanic Journalists, we had a dinner with the woman who at the time was the head of the Publishers Association. And this was back in the early 90s. So she was saying to us, it would be great if you could have your database better. So when we go and look for, Latino reporters, Hispanic reporters, that we have a base to choose from. And I remember, that's when the Cubana in me kind of came up. And I was like, that's true. We should be better about our computer systems. But how is it when a manager needs to find someone to promote? If it's a white guy who looks just like him, he doesn't need a database. He doesn't need to go to a binder full of recommendations. It just recognizes that person's ability. There's so much talk now about things changing, but I'm wondering, is it just in the moment we're sort of feeling it, it'll pass? Because we have had these moments before, whether it's the 60s coming out of the civil rights movement, and then, sort of in the 70s as more women got into the workforce, and yet we still have these paltry numbers. We still have this inequity. We're celebrating the fact that, oh, we're going to get maybe, a fourth woman in the Fortune 500.
So I absolutely share your question myself about whether this moment is different. We actually have just finished writing and releasing a report called The Equity Imperative, which for us was a really groundbreaking piece of work, which is around the responsibility that organizations have, that corporate America in specificity has, to change the equity conversation for good. Maybe a couple of threads. I actually do believe that this time is different. And there's two signals that I'm seeing that give me that optimism. I think the key is that we have to hold our collective feet to the fire on a sustained basis. But there's two things. So one is that we've broadened the aperture of the conversation outside of or in addition to diversity within our own organizations. So there's no doubt that diversity within our own organizations is incredibly important. And I do think the conversation has changed there. But this idea that there's a broader set of things that we have responsibility for, not just in the people that we hire and invest in and promote, which is, as you point out, has not had enough momentum, but it's around how do you think about the systemic changes in how do we think about the goods and services that we deliver into the market and the lens with which we look at those. How do we think about our supplier, how we spend our money and how we spend our dollars? How do we think about the resources that we put into our communities? And we could spend a whole hour just on this topic. So I do feel that we are chipping away at the problem. We aren't just chipping away at the problem, we're looking at it more holistically. And so I do think the level of conversation holistically is very different. The second thing and change that we're seeing is the pressure, the goodness in the pressure from such a myriad of directions from our employees and people, from the business community at large, and the public commitments from the business community at large, I feel really good about. From the work that the Business Roundtable did last year to the work that there's a number of not-for-profits doing that are going to create accountability and keep pressure into the system from a shared perspective. It's one thing for me, Deloitte, to make a statement and to say, this is what we're committed to. And I do expect, by the way, that journalists will continue to hold our feet to the fire on that, and that's goodness. But I think a lot of that pressure comes from when we sign up with our competitors and our clients collectively for change and action, that I think a lot of sustained momentum is going to come from. And I feel very positive about the early signals around that.
So if I am someone looking to rise, we've got young executives here that are trying to figure out what their next step should be in this environment. Do you think that it's a little easier for someone to connect with a mentor, to find someone who's willing to take them on and help them move ahead?
I do think that the collective commitment to women of color, to the Latinx, Latina, Hispanic community there's more attention. So is it easier? I think it would superficially be easy to say yes. I think the trick and where the work is thinking about who you want to develop a relationship for each of you who are having the I hope great joy to participate in this conversation today, albeit we wish it was live, not virtual. Yeah. But it's to think about what matters to you in the mentoring and sponsoring, and I think sponsoring in many cases more important than mentoring, though they're both important. What matters to you out of that relationship? And so do I think it's easier to pick up the phone or the Zoom and get the conversation? I think yes. Do I think it's just as much work to think about what matters to you and how do you evolve and invest in those relationships? I think that transcends the moment that we're in. And I hope that this platform that this wonderful organization has created helps give you some of the tools to do that.
If you were in that position now, you're back 22 years ago, you're about to have
yesterday, so it's not hard to remember.
Right. How would you approach it differently? And what do you think you would do to be able to get more out of the relationship, or what would you think about you wanted to get out of the relationship?
To be honest with you, I I joked a little bit earlier that I was focused on my clients and my kids, and that was it for many years as a young executive. And if I participated sometimes in whether it was a program or something that came organically, I probably viewed it a little more as a check the box exercise, as thinking about the give and take that comes with a mentoring and sponsoring relationship. And thinking as much about what can this person learn from me as I can learn from them. Because realizing that for a sustained real relationship, it has to go both ways. And realizing that I had as much to give as I could get, I think would have given me a different lens to how I invested in some of those relationships earlier in my career, because I didn't appreciate that they weren't just that it wasn't check the box on both sides, and really thinking about, if I'm going to spend the time both ways, what can I give in addition to what can I get from this relationship? Which has been a really important learning from me. And when because I'm still in both mentoring and sponsoring, both being and but both sides of those relationships, I'm much more deliberate in thinking about what am I if I'm sponsoring or mentoring someone, I'm very tuned into what am I learning as a really important part of the conversation, in addition to what am I helping with. And does get back into that whole symbiotic.
Yeah, that's a relationship, right? A relationship can't just be one way.
Exactly.
Well, Janet Foutty, this has been such a great conversation, and certainly have learned a lot, and I have really enjoyed it tremendously. I'm kind of out of words. It feels like we've known each other for so long.
I know. Well, like I said, the next time I'm going to get to interview you, it was really a privilege to get to spend time with you today. This is such an important moment, which you've highlighted through your questions and the conversation today. And I guess what I'd like to leave those of you participating today is a couple of things. To know that you matter, and to never, ever, ever forget, with all the chaos that's going around us, that your investment in yourself by participating in this conversation today is incredibly important. And know that there are so many of us out here, both rooting for you and, more importantly, here to help in any way that we can. That's really what this community is all about.
Great note to end on. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right. Wasn't that a great fireside chat with Janet Foutty? Thank you so much, Janet Foutty, for your inspiring leadership as the executive chair for Deloitte. And I think, as she mentioned in her comment, yes, we look forward to all coming back in person. We are, of course, virtual because of the pandemic. But at the end of the CEO Roundtable, stay tuned, because we're going to give you a preview of where we're going to be in 2022. And again, great job by Bertha Coombs. So I'm going to now present the next fireside chat between Bertha Coombs from CNBC and Chow. She is the Chief Executive Officer for AT&T Business. Check it out.
I'd like to welcome now Ann Chow. She is the CEO of AT&T Business, which is a $37 billion business within AT&T. Thanks so much for joining us today, Ann. And I wanted to start off with the fact that we share something, both immigrant kids and both who played piano from a very early age. And you talk about how that kind of has shaped the way you approach business in some ways.
Absolutely. So Bertha, thanks so much for having me here. And it's a pleasure and an honor to be speaking with you here in front of our esteemed audience. Yeah, it's kind of cool, isn't it? I think no doubt part of our immigrant stories are around how our parents came, to seek a better life, right, for their families. And part of that for me was, in my family, was wanting to immerse us in very unique experiences that we could not have had perhaps back in their home country. And one of them was music. I look back on it, and I don't know about you, Bertha, but there was a time when I was younger that I actually wanted to be a professional musician. And I had visions of Carnegie Hall and all these kinds of dreams. And fortunately, reality struck in, and at some point I realized that I was pretty good, but I was not great, and it was not really my passion. Performing really wasn't my passion, although I love music for sure. So I think it's really set a great foundation in terms of leadership and in business. As a fellow pianist, that first of all, practice is everything, right? Practice is perfect, right? And this discipline that we all have to have as leaders, no matter what our profession is. You've got to keep trying, and you've got to keep trying over again, right? And when you fail, whether you fail in a performance, right, or you fail in your practice, the key thing is that you get up and you keep at it, right? And that is how you hone your craft. That is how you hone your art and your skills. And I think those lessons very much port very well into business today. It's just as one example.
Clearly very skilled at being able to create that metaphor that inspires. It's interesting for me, part of the reason I stopped was because I realized I had to make a choice between dedicating so much time to practicing by myself versus doing activities where I could participate in things with other people. And as I got towards high school, I realized that was more important for me and more important for my development. For you, it seems as though you have always been about very much participating with people. You were one of the founding members of the AT&T University governing board to help train other people, also helping with AT&T's International Women of Color affinity group. Does that come from that immigrant experience, coming from Taiwan and thinking, I'm an outsider, I want to bring other people in too?
Yeah, no question. And Bertha, I'm sure you can relate to this as well, right? As coming from an immigrant family, I think one of the things that I have quite frankly struggled with all of my life, both personally and professionally, is this whole idea of fitting in, right? I grew up with a generational gap, a cultural gap, a language gap with my parents, and as a result, with their constant push of wanting to assimilate, it was obvious we were one of the only minority families in the community I grew up in the East Coast at the time. And I just never really fit, right? Because fundamentally, I looked very different than everybody else, right? And so this was this constant struggle. And I found that one way with which to engage with others successfully was to take on leadership roles, right? Because by definition, you have this ability and this opportunity to engage with others. And I found the same thing, for me, the pivot point of steering away from music, and as a pianist, you're very much individual, right? It's an individual sport, if you will. But I found that in order for myself to grow and to surround myself with people, I naturally gravitated to more team sports, if you will, and team activities. And I pushed myself to take on roles that fundamentally, because a lot of people now who know me don't think this is actually true, but I was very introverted and very shy throughout most of my childhood, even into young adulthood, right? And so this skill of becoming more of an ambivert, it has been a developed one. It's been one that isn't inherently in me, but I really forced myself to do that because for me in the beginning, it was about trying to fit in. Now, of course, fast forward decades, I realize now that part of my magic was actually and is actually my differences, right? And is my authenticity and what I bring to the table that's uniquely different than others. But that was certainly one of the revelations that I wish I had early on in my career.
Yeah, it does take time. And you know, it's interesting that you're at a point where you're a person of leadership. You have actually been a person who's very much talked about needing to be authentic, needing to be inclusive, and talking about the issues of bias in the corporate culture. And it seems as though this past year, all of a sudden, that wasn't just, oh, that's nice, and it's something you do over here. Now this is center stage, and we're seeing not just, you know, people of color talking about it, but people at the very top of the C-suite over the last year suddenly saying, wow, we really have to take this seriously and not just sort of check the box.
Yeah, it's so true. You know, it's I think it's a unique organization, and I'm not just even talking about the for-profit or the private sector world, but whether you're in the public sector or in a nonprofit or otherwise, or even in a community environment, educational environment. You know, there are, I think one of our big awakenings over this past year has been this idea of systemic issues, right? You know, diversity, equity, inclusion, I think, has always been this topic that feels a little uncomfortable, right? Because it feels very personal. And I think it takes a very brave and courageous organization to embrace it as a strategic imperative. You know, I happen to be very fortunate that my career has largely been spent in an organization that does embrace diversity, equity, inclusion in the fabric of our strategy. And so that was a big part of what helped me thrive along the way. Of course, I worked hard for it, did you know, many of the right things, surrounded myself with many of the right people, but you've got to have that environment, right? And I think that what the year we've just gone through and the point in time we are today, you know, we sit at the nexus of numerous crises, right? We've all talked about them over this past year: the pandemic, the recession, this awakening around systemic racism and social injustice, right? That is just so ingrained in so many facets of our society. And therefore, we know that it permeates business, right? We know that it permeates the corporate environment. The question now we have as leaders is, how do we get at it, right? How do we get at it in a way that is constructive, that is transparent, that is honest, that is authentic, but that is biased towards action and change, as opposed to, let's say, you know, in the old days, you know, one of the sayings that we used to have is, you know, it's easy to count the numbers. It's much more difficult to make the numbers count, right? And now we've moved well beyond this, right? This is about elevating the whole of organizations, which means that you not just have to focus on your teams or your culture or the organization at large, you have to focus in a way on every individual, right? And I do believe that one of the things that has occurred that is very, very positive, there are actually several positives out of this past year and the time we find ourselves in, is just this recognition and realization that connection is everything. We are here for human connection, right? And I've said this before in various speeches that I've given and conversations I've had. I wish that we coined the phrase physical distancing, not social distancing, at the very beginning of the pandemic, because we need to be physically distant right now until we tackle the enemy that is this virus. But we need social connection more than ever before, right? And I do think that this awakening around diversity, equity, and inclusion is this now almost ubiquitous acknowledgement of the power of connection and the power of human connection, which therefore must mean that we embrace the whole person in a way, right? And that is, I think, one of the many reasons why the time is now, quite frankly.
As a leader, a corporate leader in your company, how do you maintain connection? How have you been able to do that over the last year with, you know, people that you're trying to mentor and just your staff overall? You know, we all get such Zoom fatigue.
Oh my gosh, yes, it's a topic that I'm going to write about this very, very soon, because we're coming up on a year, right? We're coming up on a year of this mode of operation, if you will, right? So the whole idea of connection, I mean, it's in the early days, I would say, right? We almost found somewhat joy in this ability to be on video, you know, dressed from the waist up and not from the waist down, right?
Well, and and for introverts, in some ways, it's a little better.
Yes,
My brother was saying his son, who's a bit of an introvert, has actually done better
yes,
doing remote school because he doesn't have to deal with all of the other sort of, the anxiety of being in the halls and, and all of that. He feels like he's in a safe place.
Oh, it's so true. It's so true how different people have processed this new mode of operation, right? But what I would say is now, because we're so long into it, right, is that we're all reaching what you just called Zoom fatigue, right? We're all reaching a burnout of sorts. I wrote this piece actually on LinkedIn, and it was called a couple of months ago called like "No More Meetings," right? Part of the problem we have now is we have to schedule. Well, hey, let's schedule a Zoom, let's schedule a Teams, let's schedule a WebEx, right? So if I wanted to, back in the day, I just like call you, text you, ping you, swing by your office, right? Go out and visit you in your local, city or whatnot, right? And it would feel much more organic and authentic and not staged, right? So somehow we have to recapture that, right? What I have done, and I have switched it up over this past year, in the beginning, I will admit, especially in the heat of the crisis, it was all this, right? It was all these heavy video interactions. Well, I lost track of what day it was, what day of the week it was, what time it was in the day even. And so now I try to mix it up in terms of my mode of communication and my mode of connection. I'm very purposeful about which sessions, which gatherings I choose to engage on video versus where those maybe audio is fine, right? Because of my role in the conversation. I try to block out something that I've established for myself is Water Cooler Wednesday. So I'll block out a period of time on my calendar. I don't allow myself any meetings, and all I do is I impromptu serendipitously reach out to people via text or otherwise. Hey, can you chat? Hey, just kind of a health check. Mental health check or project check in a much more informal way, right? In a much more informal way. And then in addition to this, because I do feel that, especially in times of stress, and Bertha, my gosh, we are in massive time of stress, both personally and professionally now. I believe that having the right level of over communication is really important. And so since the pandemic started, I actually send a weekly note to my entire organization. And quite frankly, if 99% of my team doesn't read it, I don't care, right? If it helps one person in my organization feel connected to the broader mission of the organization, to what's going on, because I can't physically go out into the field and travel the world and be with them in market, this is very important to me. And I do the same with my clients as well. Ad hoc now has a beauty to it that we weren't really respectful of before, right? We really took it for granted, and so that is part of what I've tried to infuse in my daily routine to shake it up, because it is just, it's not natural, right? We as humans were not designed to interact in this way, right? I miss the handshake, I miss the hug, right? I miss physical presence with with people, and so those are just some of the things that I've done to try to, sustain, retain, and grow connection, if you will.
What about the mentoring piece? Was that something that was important for you coming up? I mean, you've been with AT&T now for more than 30 years. And I read that initially you were kind of rebuffed. It was sort of like, oh, you're, you've got a business degree. Yeah, you've got, science background, but you're not ready for sales. You're not ready for customer facing. Yes. How did you get past those hurdles, and how did you find that connection for people to see who you really are?
Yeah. Well, I would tell you this, I'll harken back to my immigrant and my diverse roots, if you will, right? And my identity of who I am. The upbringing that I had, and when I reflect back on my parents' journey, I think about grit and resilience, right? And I think about their challenges and their struggles in coming to this country with almost nothing. And there's nothing that I face that will be greater challenge than what they face, right? And so that sits with me. That's in my DNA. It's in my persona. But a part of that DNA also is being in service to others and also recognizing the importance of people and community around you. I would say mentorship plays a really vital role in anybody's career. And perhaps one of my lenses on mentorship is a little bit different than others, which is I don't believe it can be forced, right? I don't believe mentorship can be kind of cold called, if you will, right? I'm still shocked to this day when a complete stranger will reach out to me and say, hey, will you be my mentor, right? And it's almost like,
what do you say when they do?
I say, well, hey, I'm open to a conversation. Let's get to know each other first, right? Because a mentor relationship is a two-way street, right? It's got to work for both parties. So, it's a mistake that I see some people making is, hey, they assume that, hey, I'm an Asian woman, and so therefore, if another Asian woman reaches out, that's enough to sustain, to create a mentoring relationships. Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't, right? And so I think this is something that I would advise people to really be considerate about is, mentoring is great, but it can also be, it can be overly forced, in which case it's not genuine, right?
Yeah.
So I also think that there's also two types of mentoring. One is a sustained, where you establish a relationship with somebody over a sustained period of time, right? And I've had those relationships throughout my career, both as mentee as well as mentor. But I also feel that what is missed at times is the opportunity for an episodic mentor, right? So a situational mentor where at this point in time in my life, in my career, I really need help and perspective from this kind of person. So I'll give one example. I heavily stressed about the decision to have children and be vocal in and to come out in the workplace and say this, right? This book that I recently co-authored about unconscious bias, there's a story that it opens up from our primary author about perceptions of pregnant women in the workplace, right? And I will tell you that the first time I was pregnant with my first daughter, I hid it. I hid it
Really?
for a month. I hid it for as long as I physically could possibly hide it. And the reason why is I was concerned that there would be bias. I didn't know that that was the word, by the way, at the time, right? But I was concerned that it would impact my ability to compete for a promotion, which was at that point in my career, right? And so
the way you would be perceived was that you were not committed because you had a family, whereas if a man has a family, that is considered a commitment because it shows that he's stable.
Right. Or even worse, right? Even worse, she actually physically has to go out and have the baby, which means that she will not be working for 4 weeks, 6 weeks, 8 weeks.
Right.
Gosh, who knows how long, right? Because you don't know until after you have your child, right? God willing, right? And worse yet, I would be taken out of the running because of the physiological nature of actually having to give birth to the child and have a leave, right?
Just the timing.
So, yes, right. The timing of it, right? The timing of it. Nobody wants to go hire a critical position and then be left with not the candidate there, right? I mean, I would admit that I would have that kind of view too, right? And this was back, in the late 90s. And so, what I needed at the time was a situational mentor, right? I needed a mentor who had gone through that to walk me through that situation, right? And then after I became a mom, there was a period of time where the struggle of, and I hate the word balance, but, sort of the integration of my personal life and my professional life was such a challenge in the early days for me. And it was, quite frankly, all throughout. It's just, I think, one of the challenges and, quite frankly, taxes that women bear, right? And we see it today, even in terms of the impact of the pandemic, don't we? That more women are checking out of the workplace. Why is that? It's because there are so many systemic issues that place additional pressure and burden on the women and their role in the families, right?
And the pressure and burden they put on themselves, right?
Very
not to digress too far, but there was a piece in the New York Times where this woman, she's Latina, and there were side-by-side pictures, or it was one picture actually, of her in the bathroom on a conference call, changing her little one who is potty training, and then her husband on his computer in the other room.
Yeah.
And then she said, I feel kind of resentful because sometimes he'll just sit there and take a nap and, he's too busy to take care of her daughter. And I'm thinking, why do you let him do that? You've got to rearrange your contract and your relationship first, not just your job.
Yes, and so much of it, and Bertha, thank you for bringing this up, because this is something that I've actually found very kindred spirits in my Latina colleagues, right? Because there are there are similarities between the Asian culture, Latina Hispanic culture in terms of how we view ourselves and the role in the family, right? I mean, there is also a fundamental, gosh, I've worked how to break it at different times in my career, but like I have this natural, innate feeling to be in deference to others, right? And it's just in me. I don't like speaking up unless I really feel like I have something really impactful to say, right? I have this, perhaps at times over-rotated respect for kind of hierarchy and elders, if you will, and that's all ingrained in me, right, from my cultural upbringing. And sometimes those things they hamper you, right? They hamper you in the work environment professionally, and it's something that I think we've got to learn how to surface. And to your original question around mentorship, these are areas where having the right mentor can mean the world. I look back on some of those early mentors when I first became a mom, and I reflect back on some of that being the best advice possible that has shaped my leadership approach, to others, that has really just widened my sort of leadership aperture on how I really work to embrace diversity, equity, inclusion as a leader in every facet of the culture that I strive to build and grow.
And where do you go now? I mean, now that you're at the top, I would imagine there are just lots of people looking up to you for advice, looking up to you. But where do you go?
Yeah, so for me, and I love how you said 30 plus ish years, and it's something that I've actually been told not to say it because I perhaps don't look that old. Maybe, I don't know. It's that Asian skin, right?
It is. Hey, go with
it. Yeah, I will, right? I will for sure. But where I go from here, and this was probably a crossover that I started to make, quite frankly, in my mid 40s, right? And then now that I'm in my 50s, probably, this for me, where do I go now? I am now all about impact, right? I'm all about, being the change. I'm all about paying it forward. And so where I go, and this is really largely how I've spent, not only just doing my day job, of course, over the last 15-ish years, but I'm very heavily focused on ensuring that the legacy that I leave, whether it's in a client relationship, whether it's in a process that I lead the re-engineering of, whether it's in workforce development or out in our broader communities, that I'm really striving to drive systemic change in addition to doing my day job incredibly well, right? And so, examples of this, some of the work that I'm so proud of, that my company has embraced, that I quite frankly was a big catalyst in. We started an employee network, AT&T Women of Business, a couple of years ago, maybe it was about 5 years ago. And it was because we didn't have a women's network focused on the business part of our organization. It is now, it for the early years was one of the fastest growing women's networks. It was not just populated, by the way, membership was not just women. We had almost 5,000 members all around the globe, and we tackled topics, and brought certain topics to life that were not previously tackled, such as the importance of male allies, right? In your success as a woman in business. Another one was how to be an intentional ally for multicultural women of color, because of their own unique needs and the struggles that they face in the workplace. Perhaps one of the most proud initiatives that we launched was also a Women of Color initiative across AT&T. And I will tell you, I was a little bit like a dog on a bone on this one. I was pushing to have a very dedicated initiative on women of color, because I saw what was happening, across corporate America, which was women were making progress, but women of color were being left behind, right? And then the McKinsey Lean In report came in, started being published. I think it was the first one was 2016. That actually had data behind that, right? Around women in the workplace annual set of research that they do across hundreds of companies. And there was now data that said if an organization focuses only on women, women of color will be left behind, right? And so I utilize that as a catalyst to compel, and by the way, it was not hugely difficult once we had that data to create a Women of Color initiative within AT&T, which focuses on each program consists of about 200 women, but plus their supervisors. So it is not just about developing and growing the women
in
of
a sense,
color.
it's also developing the supervisors to be able to recognize someone who looks different from them, but the same qualities in that person.
Exactly, right? Because allyship and advocacy, goes even beyond mentorship, right? In order to be successful, to have true equity and representation in all facets of the business world, you need advocacy, right? You need sponsorship. We've all seen and read the studies of, hey, current course and speed, women will achieve equity in what, 75 years? That's too dang long, right? And then for women of color, it's going to be even worse. But mind you, we all know the stats, right? By the year 2060, women of color will be the majority of women in the United States, right? And so we deserve a seat at the table. We deserve, and we've got to figure out ways to accelerate, right? Accelerate what should have been. And Bertha, this is quite simply, so where I go from here, right? This is what I'm spending, much of my time on, in addition to my day job. And this really also was the impetus to join the book project, to co-author that book on unconscious bias, because that is a way to enable and support systemic change in a positive, constructive way that goes beyond, the day job, influence and impact that I can have as well.
It's interesting because people talk a lot about sort of the tax of being the other, the tax of being the Black person, and have to explain to someone that, no, I'm more nervous than you when I get stopped by the police, about driving while Black, or, I'm Latina and, I walk into the room and they might think that I'm the cleaning lady instead of the woman who is the professional who is walking in. Does it ever get to a point where you sort of feel like, at some point, can I just stop having to advocate so that it's just normal? Or do you think this is something we're just always going to have to do?
Well, here's the thing. We all have biases, right? And the biases in the system have been built up over decades and centuries of history, right? It is embedded in our policies. It is embedded in cultures, right? It is, of organizations. It is embedded in various, right? Each geography has unique cultures, right? That is based on their history, if you will. And so, will we always have to advocate? I would argue yes. Why? Because there will always be the underserved, the underrepresented. It may not be the same group of people as we have today, but there will always be, to some degree, injustices, because, and this is a fundamental belief system I have, unconscious bias is part of the human condition, right? And so while we may tackle this particular bias today, by simply moving forward, we will develop new ones, right? And we've got to develop the muscle to be able to have candid conversations, courageous conversations, uncomfortable conversations, to listen, to understand, to empathize, to engage, so that we can develop and execute action for good, right? For true progress. So, you know what, is it exhausting? Yeah, it's totally exhausting, right? It's totally exhausting. And I can't tell you how many times, even today, I'm still the only, right? I mean, it's probably more frequent that I'm the only, whether it's the only woman, the only minority, or certainly the only woman of color. That happens all the time still, right? In the room, whether it's in a client discussion, supplier discussion, team meeting, or otherwise, right? And so, I certainly strive to not be the only, right? And I may have been the first, but I certainly don't want to be the last. And so much of my personal mission, which melds into my professional role, is ensuring that there are more, right? There are more, that there is not just this only feeling, But we have to be there to support each other, you know. And here's a little safety tip, because I want to use the example that you just used with, you know, if you're a Latina and you're in a room, somebody assumes you're the cleaning person. One of the, and I cannot tell you, Bertha, how many times I've been in a meeting throughout the course of my multi-decade career where somebody asks me to take the notes or close the door or get the coffee. Okay. So here's a safety tip. I don't ever do that now, right? I don't. Even if I'm the closest.
So you don't ever ask someone to do it either.
Right. Or I'll ask not the female, right? You know, so I will not volunteer to take the notes, even though I get pressure in sessions because I take great notes. Hey, right? So
I was going to say, I'm sure you're fantastic at it.
Yeah, but what happens when you take the notes? If you take the notes, you're focusing on taking the notes and not fully engaging in the conversation, right? So, so there are little tips like that that I have had to embrace for myself, because I don't want to feed that stereotype, right? And I don't want to disadvantage myself or others who look like me or have some of the same struggles, because it's almost like the natural default, right? And
yeah.
Many people who are asking us to take the notes or to close the door or whatever don't realize that there's kind of like this double entendre in there, right, about it, right? Or the signal that it sends, you know, that somehow you are lesser than in terms of truly belonging, right? And it's
in terms of the signals sent this year. I mean, you know, my company, your company, they've all said we're putting our money where our mouth is. We're going to invest. We're going to do this. Do you think this is just a moment in time? Because certainly we've seen these kind of, let's take the great leap forward moments, right? When women were first brought in the workforce, you know, when we were coming up and we saw that first opportunity.
Right.
Is this something that is going to be sustainable and more ingrained this time around? Or, you know, are we just going to keep going from moment to moment?
I believe it will. I believe it will, and I believe it has to. Why do I feel so strongly and so confidently about that is, one, it's pervasive, right? It's pervasive now, right? It is not just one sector, right? We're not just talking about women in tech or Latinas in media or, you know, Asian hate crimes, right? There's a convergence, right? There's a convergence of imperative, right? In almost every facet of society, right? And there's been, I think, a surge, very much welcome so, of quantitative data and research and facts which complement what we who have been in the underserved communities or minority communities have always kind of intuitively known, right? And look, there are allies and advocates who are clearly emerging, right? And there have to be, right? Who are not, of a particular minority group, right? I mean, we need the white community, we need all diverse communities to lean in and work this together, right? And then this is what I think is so powerful about organizations like, like HACR, is this is all about being better together, right? I mean, this is what this conference is about. And so I also feel that one of the reasons why I feel so confidently that this is not just a moment in time, that this is about true sustainable change, is our children will demand it, right? Mm-hmm. Every generation that comes forth, and I am a proud old Gen Xer, right? But Gen Y and Gen Z, every generation is increasingly more diverse, okay? So if we are to advance society, if we are to advance the economy, if we are to advance equity, education, healthcare, income equality, if we are to advance environmentally, right? I mean, we haven't even talked about the sustainability needs of this one planet which we all live on, right? If we are to impact and drive sustainable change, we must be in a fundamentally different place and keep advancing diversity, equity, inclusion in every facet of our life, right? The younger generation will demand it, right? They will demand it because by definition, every generation will become more diverse than the others, right? And I look forward to the day where we're not even just talking about one aspect of someone's identity, right? This is one of the things, this intersectionality, if you will, right?
Yeah.
Right. I can be a China Latina, right? I can be, my children, I happen to be married to a white gentleman. So my kids, by definition, are multiracial, multicultural, right? 3 out of 4 of their grandparents are immigrants, right? And so on my husband's side, his mom is an Hungarian immigrant, right? And so, I see it, and I think oftentimes, and this is actually one of the reasons why I was so passionate about championing our Women of Color initiative at AT&T was I saw great strength in the Black sisterhood. I saw great strength in the Latina sisterhood, right? I was part of the Asian sisterhood, but I didn't see us coming together, right? And I saw that we had so many of the same barriers and struggle, and difficulties, right? And learnings that we would be better together and we would be stronger together. And I can tell you in the early days when, I kind of conducted a couple of focus groups of, an intersection of women of color, it was like therapy. It was like a cathartic moment because we found each other and realized that we could drive incredible change together, and that actually our community, our posse, if you will, was even greater and bigger than we thought it was, right? And so I'm really
Just a nice thing to find out.
Yes.
Well, let's leave it on that note. We can keep talking for quite a while here, so much to discuss, and it's been such a pleasure hearing your thoughts and your journey. I really appreciate having the chance to speak with you, and hope we can continue to have this conversation.
Absolutely. Thank you again, Bertha.
Thank you.
Well, that was a great session between Bertha Coombs of CNBC and Chow, the Chief Executive Officer for AT&T Business. Thank you so much, and for your words of wisdom, and for being such a champion for inclusion. All right, so our last interview is Bertha Coombs and Paula Santilli. Paula is the Chief Executive Officer for PepsiCo Latin America, and she was named by Forbes as one of the 50 most powerful women in business in the world. Check it out.
We want to welcome now Paula Santilli. She is the CEO of PepsiCo Latin America. She has been the CEO of overall Latin America now for just over a couple of years, it'll soon be, but she's been with PepsiCo for over 20 years, and before that was with Quaker, before PepsiCo bought it, for 7 years. So Paula, you have been someone who has really grown through the ranks in this company.
I have, Bertha. I've actually worked for food and beverage companies all my life, so throw me a category in this space, and I will tell you everything we know about that for a long time. And I have the privilege actually of having a very long career, first in Quaker and then in PepsiCo, that acquired the Quaker Oats company in the year 2001. So all of these beautiful brands, Tropicana, Doritos, Lay's, Pepsi, Gatorade, et cetera, I have tested them many times over the years. They're great.
Now you're managing a division with $7 billion in annual revenue, 70,000 people under your tutelage at this point. What has it been like this past year with the pandemic, when you've seen tremendous demand for food as people stay home, hunker down, and I know I've been stress eating ice cream and chips and stuff, but at the same time, you have to keep these workers safe.
Yes, it has been a very peculiar year, no doubt, but I do think, Bertha, one of the things that we in Latin America, maybe even Hispanics in general, we have resiliences. resiliency to crises. No, so we've seen it all over the years. We've seen earthquakes and hurricanes, and we've seen devaluation, inflation, social unrest, no, political unrest, etc. So there's a muscle there in the teams that are very exercised and very well exercised in getting a fast and agile response to the crisis. So what happened in Latin America early March last year was exactly that. No, we know how to run a crisis, and this was certainly a very good crisis. Our first and foremost worry in March and still today is the protection of our employers. No? Our people are out there on the streets of Latin America selling every single day. We have plants with very large community of employees. And, at the same time, in my personal opinion, I wanted to make sure people could find food. No, they could find Quaker Oats and Gatorade and whatever they needed to have in their kitchens. That was, for me, extremely important. I had the feeling, Bertha, that if we could not keep our supply chain going, it would bring uneasiness, no, in the social arenas. Fortunately, that did not happen. No, so we went from working pre-pandemia the way we were to working in the ways we are with very strict protocols of health, etc. in 1 second. It was quite amazing. I think I have to write another book on that one, because it was a huge learning on how creative, how flexible our employees are, how willing to support the company these employees are, and we are taking absolutely wonderful care of all of them.
This year, we've heard a lot from corporate leaders about taking care of their workers. When you think about your philosophy of leadership as a Latina at the head of a major multinational corporation for one of its largest divisions in Latin America, what's your view on what leadership needs to be, and what happened this year? Is it different from what you've viewed before?
There's one big difference, Bertha, and I'm very sad about it. And the biggest difference is, in the past, I was a hugger. No, I went to a plant and I hugged every single, frontline workers, operators. I'm used to hugging salespeople, no, and showing my appreciation for their commitment in the way we do in Latin America, which is we hug, we kiss, etc. So that was a big change for me, and I really miss it. No, so communication, notwithstanding, has changed. No, we are behind masks, but we are creating new gestures of love, saying, hey, bow my head, I respect you, I love you, I'm here for you. I'm, working side by side with you on the streets of Latin America, etc. So that was a big change for me. And then, Bertha, I have to say, as the months went by, I also made an interesting discovery, and that's, we have to use humor, and optimism, especially optimism in the right situation. And this has been a terrible moment in our lives for many families, and I don't mean to minimize the the death, the family strains, etc. But to use optimism in front of very large organization was very significant, Bertha, because we have a responsibility as leaders of telling our base, no, this will go away. No, there's light at the end of the tunnel. Vaccines are coming. No, we know how to operate in a safe environment at all times. So this sense of optimism is something that I've been trying to exercise more and more. as people, their family members lose their employment. Some people have unfortunate deaths in their family, So in the middle of everything that is tough, we as business leaders have to keep our optimism very, very sharp,
And keep the troops up in the midst of so much.
Bertha. I mean, things will tend to get better as we all get vaccinated eventually, So it's putting out there a vision of, hey, we can come out of this together, and we can learn and be better after this situation than what we've ever been before.
Last year, I talked with Ramon La Huerta about sort of the social reckoning that has come from the pandemic, and with the demonstrations here in the US about social equity. It's a little different in Latin America, but it's still a very big issue, generally along class, but also along ethnic lines, people who are Native versus people who are Hispanic in origin. How has trying to deal with that this year within the context of corporate America, corporate life, has that been something that's resonated among your various employees in Latin America?
Yeah, I know what you mean, Bertha. Personally, myself and my leadership team, I would say that almost everybody in LATAM, we're super dedicated to our front line. This means that my preferred dress item is my safety boots. Okay, I really like to go out to the streets of Latin America in my sales uniform or my plant uniform. My safety boots are the most comfortable thing I have in my wardrobe, and that makes me face to face to everyone, whether it's my own frontline employees, whether they're inside a warehouse, a plant, or driving one of our trucks. And it takes me and my leadership team face to face to our consumers and face to face to our small little customers. As you know, Bertha, we have like over 2 million customers in Latin America. These are mom and pop stores, These are tenderos, colmados, These are small little stores, and there's a family in front of that store, So this is the way I've always done business, Bertha. Sometimes I have to wear the pearls. Okay, so I do have one single bunch of pearls, and I'll use it every once in a while. But my preferred form of understanding our business, understanding our people, our communities, is by walking the streets of Latin America. So, and in this post-pandemia situation, Bertha, what I'm telling all our company, and I'm telling every single business person out there, is, hey, we have to hold hands all together and bring brand back prosperity to the ciudadano de a pie, al citizen on the streets. That is our role. We are not in the business of creating beverages or snacks or healthy breakfast. We're in the business of creating prosperity. We want to bring families up into a better livelihood. And that's what I tell the business community. I tell our leadership teams, our people. That's our responsibility as we walk through the final stages of pandemia. How do we, as business people, elevate the ciudadano de a pie? How do we elevate the citizen that is out there in the streets of Latin America that has, very little opportunities? And how do we help? How do we help in this agenda is going to be very important.
I want to bring that back to the corporate culture. How do you try to help elevate people who might normally not have access to these leadership ranks? I mean, and how did it happen for you? Normally, when I think in Latin America in particular, when I see women in power, it's often women who have come from families. There might be in a family business, it's sort of inherited, but not necessarily seeing women who have worked their way up the corporate ladder. How did it happen for you? Did you have a mentor?
Yeah, I've had multiple mentors, no, and today I am a mentor of a large group of people, no, and I actually bend over backwards to try to have a conversation to especially whichever woman wants to, speak with me within the company. But no, I have to tell you, Bertha, I grew up in meeting rooms that were 100% male, no. So today, I am super aware that it is my responsibility to make it easier for all those women out there, as many as we can. In fact, that's why we wrote a book, no, eventually, just to put these ideas out there to inspire and bring as many people as we can with us, no. The corporate culture is there, Bertha. No, this thing that I'm describing about being very operational, close to the market, in our booths, is everywhere in PepsiCo, no, around the world, also in Latin America. And you are right. Sometimes it is different, no. So when I walk. Let me tell you one anecdote that maybe is descriptive. One day, before the pandemic, actually, I walked into a little store in Lima, Peru, okay? And the store was beautiful, no? So I have no idea who's behind the store. And I walk into the store and I'm saying, qué bonita esta tienda, no? I'm actually very expressive. So I'm saying, this is, it has nice lighting. The floor is super clean. I like the look and feel of this very small store in a really low neighborhood in Lima, Peru, no? So by that time, I'm, being all expressive with my sales team that is right behind me. I reached the counter and there's a tiny woman there standing. She starts to cry, Bertha, like she starts to cry and I'm saying, oh my God, what did I say? No? And when she finally calms down, she says to me, nobody had ever congratulated me for the way my store looks. No? Huh. She was moved because that was a nobody, but she kind of felt, I was kind of somebody in charge in PepsiCo, no? I was really being honest and authentic about the good work she was doing, okay? So now, Bertha, long story short, I am always telling women what a wonderful work you are doing. You are amazing, no? You have super high standards. I can see how high your standards are. You will do so well, no? So I sat with this woman for a little while until she was calmed down. She told me her whole life, how she's putting her son through university, how she could pay a trip to, I think it was Ecuador for the kid in school. And that's my business today, Bertha. I'm here to spark growth, no, to bring prosperity to these people that have not had great opportunities in life. And I think we can help them, no? We can help them, and we do help them when we paint their store on the outside. We take a cooler, we take a rack, we teach them the financial inclusion that today is super fundamental, no? We create capability building forums for them, etc. We're creating something that nobody else has done for these ciudadanos de a pie, no? And that's the culture. That's what we live for, Bertha.
Do you think, Paula, that it's harder to, the reaction from that woman, do you think it's harder for women to get recognition in Latino America than it is in the US or Canada or Europe where we're more used to, or am I just being, you know, am I being overly biased in thinking that it's a little more machista there?
I don't know, Bertha. I know the US, of course, very well, and Europe is, but you know, I think here in Latin America, which is what I can really let you, what I can talk about, it's these women are trailblazers. No, they are real trailblazers, whether they are in agriculture, they are in commerce, suppliers, no, and yeah, for the most part, they have had a difficult life, no. So the fact that we elevate them, that we give them visibility, that we encourage them is super vital, because they thrive, Bertha, on a tiny amount of encouragement, no? And that's why I'm encouraging today every woman I see in Latin America, because they really thrive behind that, no? And they don't have sometimes the privilege of a family, sometimes a privilege of a community that recognizes them, no? It's not something that today is that common in Latin America, unfortunately. So let's try to change this, no? And I'm happy we can change this together.
Are you finding that when you do go to a conference or una empresa that you are seeing more women leaders?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I've lived in Mexico for 12 years, and I run into women in leadership. And by the way, they're all my friends, no? Whether they're in Argentina or Colombia, I know them all because it's not that large of a group, and but it's a very noisy group, Bertha. So I'm happy, you know, that we're all working together in different initiatives. But there's a huge amount of women in leadership role, working actively in different areas to help other women. No?
And how important have male mentors been? You know, I ask this because when I think about my own career, I was always sort of very, I'll just work hard, work hard, work hard, work hard. And I didn't ever really reach out for mentors. I was just trying to reach out just to, you know, put the numbers on the board, get my story out there and do that. I'm just wondering, as women are coming up, what should they look for in a mentor? And especially when you're looking for a male mentor, can that be a little more difficult than a female mentor?
No, it's just as good as a female mentor, no? So you're right, Bertha. And those are two things that we notice in women in Latin America. No, we put our heads down, we do our work exceptionally well, no? So because the work is absolutely amazing, we get more work, no? And more projects are assigned to us. And so we try to do even more, and we do it, no? And we're always on time on our projects. Our budget is always perfect, or we save money. And whatever we do is absolutely amazing, no? In that arena, women normally forget two things. One is to create a network, and the other one is to find the right mentors, no? In a company like PepsiCo, the mentorship programs are well oiled, Bertha, no? So we have a habit of assigning young up and coming talent a mentor that will, you know, walk with you through years in your career, will watch you, will be able to give you wise advice in a private fashion, in a trusted fashion, and you will learn through that mentor, no? And we have those programs. Networking also is happening inside the company, but what I normally tell every Latina out there is, do you have a mentor? Do you have a network? No, and they say, what's a network? What do you mean by a mentor? No, so we have to talk a little bit about this and explain that these two things are catalyzers of your career. No, they are tremendous help. A male mentor, and I've had mostly all male mentors, no, they have been able to tell me in the privacy of a one-to-one conversation, very tough things that I have said, oh my God, I better pay attention to what you're saying, no? Some things that I was, completely had no understanding that I was creating an impact that was not the best, for example, no? That I was being misunderstood in some occasions, that I was maybe doing too much of this and too little of the other, and was being unbalanced. No, so that's the type of invaluable mentor conversation when there's trust, there's intimacy, there's understanding of each other, that I really think women should go for out there. No. And then network is the other thing, because again, we put our heads down, we do our work so well, we have no time for this understanding of the 360 environment, no? We don't tend to build links with somebody in another division or in another country or in another function because we're so busy, no? And we don't understand the value of having a wide network, no? And those are two things that I'm always telling women, and I think are very important. Don't be shy, no? Don't think, spend some time in your calendar to find the right mentor, to find the right network.
How do you do that? Do you just go, hey, I want you to be my mentor? And I mean, that to me seems like an even more nerve-wracking process than trying to find a mate in some ways.
No, you just have to say, hey, I know you so well. I see how you think. I would love to have a short conversation with you. I'm struggling with a few things and I'd really like your advice. No, that's all you need to say. You don't need to initially say, hey, can we sit up for a mentoring relationship? Maybe you can do that in PepsiCo. That is something you can do, of course, no? But just to make it normal, I see you all the time, you see me. Do you have a few minutes to tell me a few pieces of advice that I'm interested? I have a few questions. People say yes. I mean, especially in Latin America, we're all superhuman, super warm, no? So, but you have to work over that initial shyness, no? That is a blocker in your career, and Bertha. That's what I tell younger women.
And one of the things I wonder about, you talk about it, there being a process at Pepsi, and you've been with the company and worked your way up. What about people who sometimes think maybe they should move around? Can you talk a little bit about the pros and cons of maybe going somewhere else to get more experience, or should you stick with it and stick with one company where maybe you can get more experience there?
Listen, careers come in all shapes and fashions today, Bertha, no? And we have in PepsiCo a combination of longtime employees that have been around with the company for many years. And of course, that gives them a huge knowledge on the company, a huge understanding of the categories, our products, etc., a huge understanding of the ways of working of PepsiCo, etc., no? For a mentor, I would say somebody like that is a really cool thing to have, no? Because that's the person that has all the 360 understanding and can read the waves, etc., of how you are being read inside the organization, no? We have people coming from other companies as well, and we love them as well, no? They are incredibly valuable. So today, it depends, Bertha. What I tell Latin women is make sure the ecosystem that you're walking into is amazing. Make sure that ecosystem is ready to elevate you, no? And today we can research whatever companies and organizations or whatever pretty well, talk to people that work there, get their opinion. And if the ecosystem, and go to work to the company that has the best ecosystem, no, that you feel more comfortable with. Don't walk into an ecosystem that is going to be, like complicated for you. Go into an ecosystem where you will feel welcome, will you have, the right programs for your personal development, etc. Lift your antennas to understand if the ecosystem you're walking into is the right one for you. That is something, it's more important than your compensation. Actually, it's a way more important that your compensation. Your compensation will increase over the years, and you will grow your career if you're in a great ecosystem. And by the way, Bertha, I'm convinced PepsiCo, for not only for women but also for Black people, Indigenous people, etc. We're a very good ecosystem. We're learning every single day to improve ourselves. No.
Now that you're the big jefa,
Sí.
how do you get that kind of feedback? Are you still looking for mentors? Do you still find mentors, and where do you find that?
Well, my boss, Ramon Laguarta, is very clear in terms of giving me feedback. We speak the same language. That's a good one, no? So he can say whatever he wants in Spanish, and I'll get the message. But today, my peers are my mentors, no? And they are I actually, Bertha, I had to learn how to be super open and accept feedback, no? So for a long period of time, I had to ask for the feedback. I had to, tell somebody I was walking out of the meeting room at the time, how did you feel the meeting went? Was I okay? No? So these are people I trust and they gave me automatic feedback because we were walking out of the meeting, no? After a while, when it became normal for me to always ask for feedback, no, through a phone call, elevator speech or whatever, it became automatic, Bertha. It was quite interesting, actually, no? Because I no longer had to, can I have your feedback? So, automatically my reports and my peers say, what you said didn't sound that well. Oh my God, what did I say? No, what are you talking about? Tell me about it. No. So it became, Paula is open to receiving feedback. So I'm going to be honest with her and I'm going to tell her what I think. And that is invaluable in my career. No, you could be tired, you could be misunderstood, anything. And the fact that somebody that reports to me say, not the wisest thing, you didn't say the wisest thing in that meeting, I really appreciate it. I thank them. I take action about this feedback and I course correct all the time, Bertha. That's part of the fun aspect of being a leader. We have to course correct every single day, our own leadership styles, our strategies, our execution, etc.
That must be pretty gratifying to feel that you've created a culture like that.
Now it is, Bertha, but I have to tell you, at the beginning, I was, I had no practice in this, no? For example, the networking thing. I had an external mentor, which is Marty Selman. He's actually one of the authors of this book. He's an executive coach and very trained and very experienced. He pointed out to me something that nobody else had pointed out to me, that I wasn't building a network. I wasn't being strategic about building a network, no? So I had to sit with, at that time, with my assistant, make a list of people that I wanted to build into my network. And I sent an email to all of them saying exactly what I told you earlier. No, hey, do you have 15 minutes? I would love to just connect for an informal chat. No, in a period of 6 months, Bertha, I was another person. Claro, after 6 months of talking to one, to the other, having coffee, breakfast, whatever, I had so much information, you would not believe it. No, I had really started this exercise of building a network. No, and even if you're a small tendera, like my friend in Lima, Peru, no, she has to have a network with suppliers, with an accountant, with the municipality people, no, with the person that I don't know, that cleans the street every morning in Lima, etc. She has to build a really strong relationship with all these individuals, because you need a network before you need it. Okay, you need to have built it before you need it. When you have a problem to solve and you don't have a network, it's too late to build a network. You can't say, hey, good morning, I'm Paula Santilli, I would need your help. That's weird. No, but if you built this network, it's fertilizante para tu carrera, Bertha, I think. No, it's a fertilizer, catalyzer to your career. So, and get rid of shyness. That's one thing I have to tell Hispanic women. I have to tell you, no.
No tenga penas.
No tengas pena, ¿no? No tiene tiempo para atenderme, no va a tener ganas. Mentira, ¿no? People like that you're interested in them, ¿no? And they feel, wow, amazing. That person in the organization is so courageous and wants to hear from me. People like to live on that, no? They like to feel like that way.
Well, Paula Santilli, it has been a pleasure speaking with you, and I hope we can make a connection and
yes,
keep
I will.
one up.
I'll follow you on LinkedIn, Bertha. That's a really cool way today to make a network. By the way, technology has been very helpful, and we'll keep in touch.
It really has. It really has. Thanks again.
Thank you.
All right. Wasn't that amazing? Such a, three inspiring CEOs for our first ever all-women CEO roundtable. A big thanks to Janet Foutty of Deloitte and Chow from AT&T Business, and Paula Santilli from PepsiCo Latin America. And a big thanks to Bertha Coombs from CNBC. We appreciate this. This is Bertha's third CEO roundtable that she's moderated for us, and we're so proud of her as a Latina on CNBC. So thank you again so much. I want to also take this time to thank our sponsors. Thank you to Ford Motor Company, UPS, and our Latina champion sponsor, Bank of America. Thank you so much for your support of HACR and our second annual Latina Empow Her Summit. Just a few things before we go to our networking reception is to one, that this platform will be available to you for the next 30 days. So if there's any sessions that you missed, you can come back to it. We recorded everything. So come back to it for the next 30 days and experience this platform at the time of your convenience. And also, we're going to be sending you a survey. We encourage you to please participate in the survey. As an incentive, 3 participants who take our survey will receive a special prize from HACR. So please give us some good feedback. We want to hear from you. And so, before we also go to our session, I do want to just take this time to thank all of you for joining us for our second annual Latina Empow Her Summit. Thank you to our board. Thank you to the production team. But can everyone please give a big virtual applause to our set staff and our team? They worked so tirelessly to put this together. This was a lot of work to put these together. And of course, to all of our speakers, and so many that made this such a great Latina Empower Summit. Now, we want you to be with us next year. Save the dates, March 21st to the 23rd. We will be in person for our third annual HACR Latina Empower Summit, and we have chosen, silence please, or drumbeat, Orlando, Florida. Orlando will be the site, and we'll be doing it at the brand new JW Marriott Bonnet Creek. So as we conclude this great Latina Empower Summit, we want to give you a preview video of what you will see next year in Orlando, Florida for our third annual HACR Latina Empower Summit. And after that, we will see you in the networking reception. Muchas gracias, que los bendiga, and we will see you soon. Thank you very much.
Everyone believes in the magic that is Orlando, the destination of dreams, worldwide home of unforgettable moments. But the truth is, the reality is even more amazing. Mind-blowing innovation goes beyond fairy tales into the real world. Welcome to the city whose magic casts a spell on the most seasoned traveler, where the spice of life is embraced and culture enriches the multicultural fabric. Welcome to the reality of Orlando. Come step outside the box and prepare to be astonished. Because the best thing about magic is finding that it's real. The best thing about Orlando is discovering there's more magic than you ever thought possible.